Hey there, fellow resistors. Charlie Angus here on the Meidas Canada Network, the Resistance Network. I want to start off by saying, again, incredible the response we're getting. Here's some messages. I'm an Australian. I stand with Canada. Thanks, cousin. We've got your back too. Viva Mexico. Viva Canada. That's from Mario. With you, Canada, from Pennsylvania, USA. That's from Lisa. Thank you, Lisa. What we're doing here with Meidas Canada, we may be nestled up in the wild woods of northern Canada in the north of the continent, but we're trying to build this global network, reaching out to each other, talking about resisting fascism. That's why we started working with Ben Masilis and his great crew at Meidas Touch, because in order to stand up to fascism, we have to build a much broader network. We're seeing how Donald Trump, the mask has come off, if there ever was a mask, how the fascist playbook is being enacted on the streets, threatening people, and we're seeing incredible acts of resistance. Many of those acts of resistance are not being talked about on the mainstream evening news. We're getting it in our social news feeds. We're getting messages sent to us. We are going to try and talk about what that resistance means, because it's very important for people to believe that resistance is possible. What the fascists want you to think is that there's no point in standing up to power, that power is a monolith. They also are trying to break acts of solidarity, to criminalize people who show solidarity. We see that with the Keir Starmer government in the UK targeting famous authors and musicians who show solidarity with Palestine. It's about breaking solidarity apart. But you know what? They're not going to do that. So today we're going to start off by talking about a photograph, a famous photograph, and then we're going to broaden that out into a larger discussion of how you can be a resistor. Because in the age of fascism, as we say here at Meidas Canada, there's no such thing as bystanders. You're either an enabler or a resistor. And one of the tasks that we're trying to do here is to show you how to be that resistor. So let's talk about this photograph. Famous photograph discovered, I think, around the 1990s of a dock in Hamburg as the Nazis are launching another ship for the Nazi Navy. And all the men on the dock are enthusiastically giving the fascist salute. All except one man. One man in the middle of the crowd has his arms crossed and he's not going along. When they discovered this photograph, they were like, wow, who was this guy who was not going to be intimidated, was not going to be carried along by the groupthink? He was going to say no to fascism. So posters were made of this. And one of the slogans on the posters was, be that guy. So I'm asking you folks, and this is why we're here at Meidas Canada, is asking you to be that guy. The guy who stands up, or the gal, and says, I'm not going along. I'm not going to be intimidated, and I'm not going to be fooled into thinking that mob rule is just rule. So who was this guy? Well, there's been many theories about who it was, but probably the most likely was a man named August Landmesser. Now, August Landmesser was a working class German. He worked on the docks. He even joined the Nazi Party in 1931, thinking it would help him get a job. August fell in love with a beautiful young woman, Irma Eckler, but she was Jewish, and that made him an enemy of the state. She was carted off to a concentration camp, and then he was sent to a concentration camp. They had two beautiful young daughters who were taken away from them and sent to an orphanage. August was later then pressed into the German army, and he probably died in around 1943 in Croatia. His wife, Madame Eckler, was murdered by the Nazis. And all that remains is this photo of him resisting them. It's a powerful photo. I learned about this photo in a book that I suggest you consider reading. It's called Moral Ambition: How to Stop Wasting Your Time and Start Making a Difference, by the Dutch author Rutger Bregman. And Rutger Bregman does a lot of really interesting analysis of acts of moral power, where people have decided to take a stand, people have decided to make a difference, and how that difference actually changed lives and changed the course of world history. He tells the story of Newlanden, Netherlands, which had the highest concentration of Jewish people who were protected by locals than anywhere else in Europe during the Second World War. What was the secret in Newlanden? Now, Bregman writes that, there's been a lot of whitewashing of the complicity of the defeated countries with the Nazis, and talk about resistance was made greater after the war than actually existed. He writes, many people thought resistance was futile and acted accordingly. And so a civilized country largely stood by and watched as its Jewish population was carted off to camps. Public officials willingly took part. The police helped nab Jews in hiding, and the national railways took care of the transit. So the officials went along, the state went along, and yet in this village of Newlanda, people resisted. So why? Now, there's been many studies done after the war trying to figure out what was the secret for resistance. What was it made that some people stand up and others went along? Why some people put their lives at risk and others pretended they didn't see. And they found that there was no common thread. It wasn't that you were more religious or more atheist, that you were more left or more right, that you were more conservative or more radical. Some people resisted, others didn't. Your education didn't seem to make a difference whether you lived in a downtown urban area and were exposed to other cultures, or you lived out in the country. None of those factors mattered. Psychologist Cass Sunstein described the people who made the resistance possible as zeros. And what I mean by a zero is that in the vast majority of cases, the people who actually took part in helping Jewish people hide from the Nazis did so because they were asked. They were asked by someone who came up to them and said, I need you to do this. Those are the zeros, the people who initiate the resistance by going to others and asking them to help. The fascinating thing about this principle is that the vast majority of people who did help did so by being asked. So consider this kind of like a contagion. The original contagion is the zero that says we have to resist. The contagion talks one person into helping. They become the ones. And then the ones reach out and begin bringing others in, the twos. And once you've gone from 0 to 1 to twos, you begin to build resistance at a much larger level. It's that simple. Maybe it's complicated on the ground, but it's that simple. I was thinking when I was reading this of G.K. Chesterton's book, The Man Who Was Thursday, about the power of two coming together. And he writes, through all this ordeal, his root horror had been isolation. And there are no words to express the abyss between isolation and having one ally. It may be conceded to the mathematicians that 4 is twice 2, but 2 is not twice 1. 2 is 2,000 times 1. When the 0 connects with the 1 and the 1 connects to the 2, that's when resistance happens. So in the village of Newlanda, Bregman looks at who and how this started. So Arnold Dowis would be considered the 0. Now, in normal, peaceful life, Mr. Dowis was probably a bit of a failure. He wasn't married at a time when most men would have gotten married. He didn't have many possessions other than his bicycle. But he was damned if he was going to go along with the fascists. So he began petty acts of resistance, cutting telegraph wires, making a nuisance of himself, and getting the run put on him. And so he was traveling across Holland, doing little acts of petty resistance until he came to the village of Newlanda. And he realized that this was a place he could help hide Jewish people who would otherwise be murdered. And so he was the 0, and Max Leons became the 1. And the two of them began to pester their neighbors. That's what they did. They went in, they knocked on doors, they tried to pressure people into hiding Jewish families. Now that's a big step to take, because once you've taken that, you're putting your own family at risk of being murdered. And we know that many people who did that faced the ultimate threat from the Nazis. But in Newlanda, more and more people began to agree. And it wasn't because they were necessarily even morally superior. They were pestered, they were pushed, they were prodded. Arnold Dowis would not take no for an answer. And what ended up happening is that this became the one community that protected more Jewish people than anywhere else in Europe. Powerful story. But here's again a really important lesson in the importance of resistance. Some of the studies found that only a mere 3% of the people that they interviewed who helped hide Jewish people did that for less than a month. Only 3% just helped for a little bit and then pulled out. The vast majority of activists became deeply engaged in resistance. They became zeros and ones themselves. It said that the studies found that 65% of people who were asked, who decided that they would take the risk, ended up helping more than 5 Jewish people each survive the war. That's the power of the 0 to the 1 to the 2. So what does the lesson tell us? It tells us that we have to be asking each other to step up. You know, I think one of the things that's most frightening in this time, and we're watching the doom scrolling, and are you one of those people who you wake up in the morning and you reach for your phone and your eyes are half shut and you're terrified to see what's happened the night before? Stop doom scrolling. I know we got to stay on top of things, but you cannot be paralyzed by the fear. I remember at one of our resistance rallies, town halls in Toronto, a woman got up and she spoke and she said how terrified she was by what was happening. She didn't know what to do. So she went out and started knocking on doors of her neighbors to talk to them. She hadn't done that before. And they all agreed. They were all afraid. So they built a local chapter of resistance. That's how it's done. It's the reaching out. It's the saying, I can't do this on my own. Another really important lesson to be thinking of at this time is Zoom is not going to save the world. You got to get off Zoom. Sitting on Zoom in your jammies and trying to talk with people about change isn't going to bring change. You may use it as a tool to get some things organized, but you got to go out and meet people. You got to meet people where they are. And you got to meet people that you wouldn't normally meet, because it's that connection of people with very different backgrounds and differing interests, agreeing on a common cause, which is fighting for the rule of law, fighting for your neighborhood, fighting against hate. That builds community. And once that community solidarity is there, just like in Newlanda, people stay true to the project. So a couple of quick examples here. Tesla takedowns. I've talked to women in the suburban belt around Toronto who just didn't know what else to do, and they were just so offended by Elon Musk and his fascist attitude. They said, we decided we would start a Tesla takedown, but we didn't know how to do it. So we posted on Facebook that we were going to go out, and the woman said to me they were terrified that they were going to get shouted at and threatened, and it would be an awful experience. Instead, people came out because people were looking for something to do. And then she said people who were driving by, who actually drove Teslas, stopped. And they weren't there to yell. They were there to say, listen, we bought the car because we like the car. We hate the guy who owns the car company. So they came and supported too. And out of those people not knowing each other, they started to build community. We've talked here at Meidas Canada about the role of the grandmothers against genocide. That's a really powerful example because it started in Toronto with the Zero, Ted Schmidt, the high school teacher that I knew when I was young. Ted, in his 80s, calling me and saying, I cannot sit on the sidelines and watch genocide. I'm going to stand out on Kingston Road in Toronto's busiest East End every Thursday morning with a sign that says, don't normalize genocide. I said, well, Ted, what's that going to accomplish? He said, I can't not do this. I have to do something. So Ted started standing out on the street, and other people came and joined him. And that became a weekly vigil. My mother, who had never done anything political in her life, who called me one day and said, I cannot any longer sit back and watch children being starved to death. I'm a grandmother. I must do something. So my mother met Ted. My mother started her Grandmothers Against Genocide, which is Wednesday mornings, 8 o'clock at Bloor and Bay in downtown Toronto. And out of that group, is formed this incredible network of people who come together every week, and they've broken off and started to do other rallies and vigils and events. They're building community because resistance is about community, because once you're strong, it's like G.K. Chesterton said, you know, 2 is not twice 1, 2 is 2,000 times 1. That's the power of resistance. You know, I see people doing things all the time. I'm trying to do shout outs for them, like the women who stand outside the Russian embassy in Ottawa. I went and stood with them. It was a really powerful moment. You know, the Putin trolls heard I was there. They were going to come. They were going to harass me. They were going to harass people. We aren't intimidated by this stuff. We're going to stand up to fascism. We're going to stand up to the trolls. We're going to stand up to hate. So this is the lesson for today. You got to be that guy. Be that gal. If you're doing stuff and you're planning stuff, let Meidas Canada know. It doesn't matter where in the world you are. This is the global conversation of resistance. So I want to know what you're doing. I want to know if there's a way we can amplify it. This is really, really, really important stuff. You're not going to get the stories of resistance, the incredible acts that we're seeing, particularly in the United States, putting the run on ice. You're not seeing that on your news feed. So that's why doom scrolling is not helping you. Doom scrolling is not telling you about the good acts, but we've got to find this alternate network of global resistance and telling stories so we can encourage each other, because we're going to keep kicking at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. We're going to do this together, my friends. So for Charlie Angus, the resistance team here up in the wilds of northern Canada, I want to thank you. Merci. Megwitch. We're in this together. Thank you.